When Terminator was originally released in theaters in 1984, it helped to revolutionize science fiction-based film in the United States, or even internationally for the scope of depth and complexity of the film itself. Despite the fact that only true story for the Terminator features are the original James Cameron-led films, the complexities of the film were later minimalized with the advances in technology, when in comparison to the time when the films were first released. But the speculative scenario is this: the theory of plasma rifles according to Terminator 1 and Terminator 2. According to James Cameron, weapons from the Terminator films were depicted as futuristic, all developed in scope to combat the threat posed by Skynet. Humans quickly abandoned warfare among itself and instead focused on a coordinated effort to fight for survival against the machines. So all of the weaponry in the future was uniquely adapted to specifically combat the robots created and used by Skynet to achieve its programming of exterminating the human race. Expounding upon the theory further, harder that in the original film the T-800 model needed weaponry in its pursuit to terminate Sarah Connor and had to use what was available in the United States at the time. While the scene itself is minor, to those with an understanding or even the greater lore for the original two features, harder that it was an important emphasis on weaponry development in the United States or publicly available firearms in the United States at the time. While through circumstances in the film, the Terminator unit visited a gun store and was shown a selection of weaponry which was readily available in 1984. The unit now made its iconic or infamous question about plasma rifles, to which the gun store owner merely responded by mentioning that the particular inventory there was all that they had. While considered insignificant, this scene was later theorized and somewhat discussed by analysts and even film historians for and from the context of the entire scene itself. For a bit of context, plasma is a state of matter that, depending on the fictional source referring to the said weaponry, can essentially be charged particles, and although rare on Earth, plasma does exist throughout the rest of the known and unknown universe. Using plasma in or with a weaponry-based format can further vary depending on the means for discovery or manipulation and even production of the weapon or ammunition source that used or would use plasma. From dialogue mentioned in the two films, Skynet's war against the vestiges of the human civilization have somewhat destroyed records prior to the establishment of Skynet. So details about historical events relating to people or specific occurrences in relation to technology are technically unknown, but with a basic interpretation to correlate events by. In Terminator 1, Kyle Reese mentioned such to Sarah Connor, as this was intentional by John Connor on the Resistance to hamper or prevent any prior time-traveling events by Skynet, or to further complicate things, or to even stop progress if a Terminator unit was sent into the past. In Terminator 2, the reprogrammed Terminator made further references to Skynet, theorizing about specific events pertaining to Skynet itself, onto the war against the remnants of humanity, as the unit scoffed at John Connor's attempts to destroy human records to avoid Judgment Day, because all Skynet needed to do was technically predict human behavior, which was relatively simple, as it expounded upon the concept to the young John Connor and said that cruelty was a unique human behavior. Miles Dyson mentioned that upon the recovery of the prior T-800's unit remains, while Dyson had implied that the research itself was innocent, it led to the demise of humanity itself. These aspects of the plot and story not necessarily being known, it can be reinterpreted as events which were pivotal to the Skynet war, and all of this being potentially lost knowledge. This was theorized as when the T-800 unit was with the weapons dealer, and as mentioned was asked about the phased plasma rifles due to the lost or uncertain records prior to the war. Depictions of the war had the Resistance using plasma rifles against Terminator units, as conventional bullets had minimal impact upon them during the initial phases of the war, and development of more advanced weaponry were technically needed for the Resistance to destroy units in large large numbers to stop Skynet's conquering of the planet and the destruction of humanity. Such a weapon was a clear threat to a Terminator unit, even if the weapon wielder wasn't experienced, as once the T-800 unit was told that there weren't any rifles of the sort available publicly, it's theorized that it became more aggressive against Sarah Connor due to the lack of any wheeled weaponry that could stop it from its mission. This was somewhat confirmed when Kyle Reese mentioned this particular detail to Sarah, as if he could theoretically destroy or stop the unit. He replied that with the public weaponry of 1984, it wasn't really possible or extraordinarily difficult to do. Assumptions harder that for the unit to even ask such a question to the weapons dealer harder that plasma rifles were in existence in some capacity from Skynet's records of humanity prior to the war in some way, but the exact specifics were lost or destroyed, as further mentioned before, by the Resistance, so consensus harder that the rifles did exist in a decent capacity in 1984. However, it wasn't publicly available for whatever reason, as it does make sense seeing how the development of plasma rifles became so apparent that the Skynet and Terminator forces, and even the Resistance, were all using such technology by the time of the war in John Connor's time, as from events in the film it had to take an explosive to destroy the unit, but only after being severely damaged through multiple instances. If the unit had known that plasma rifles were widely available at that time in 1984, then it might have pursued its mission to discreetly avoid detection by any or every human armed in its path to kill Sarah Connor. Final observations harder that such technology couldn't have just been created once the war against Skynet started with the remaining human armies. These plasma weaponry had to have existed in some way prior to the war for it to be so easily produced or even improved upon for the war. The unit was aware of the weaponry and just ascertained that it was potentially in development by the United States military against the Soviet Union, which was the other threat against it per Judgment Day. On that the plasma rifle was so much of an inquiry that plasma rifles were specifically added to the greater Terminator lore or story after the original two films had been debated as to the authenticity of the very concept of the Terminator needing or being threatened by the use of such plasma-based weaponry.